The Afghan government under pressure to do more to protect women as human rights advocates talk about worrying setbacks. So, is the region heading forwards or backwards on women's rights? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Sami Zaidam. Tortured for simply saying no. That's what happened to Sahar Gul, sold by her brother into marriage when she was about 13 or 14. She was beaten and imprisoned by her husband and his family. Gul's mother-in-law, sister-in-law and father-in-law were convicted and sentenced to 10 years in jail for the torture. But in a decision that's angered rights groups, a court has now reversed their convictions. Jennifer Glass met Sahar.
Sahar Gul has come a long way in a year and a half, but she's scared again. An Afghan court just freed the 2 women and a man convicted of trying to kill her.
They tortured me when I was a child. Why did they let them go? They should be punished and they should be sent back to jail.
When Gul came to the world's attention a year and a half ago, she was battered and bruised. She'd spent months locked in a room. The family that had bought her for $5,000 pulled out her hair, ripped off her nails, and burned her with hot wires, all because she refused to become a prostitute.
When Sahar Gul's attackers were convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison, women's rights activists here hailed it as a step forward. Accountability in a society where violence against women remains common. The court's reversal, they say, is one of a series of events that shows that women's rights here are under attack.
In May, Conservative Parliament members criticized the law that protects women, passed by presidential decree. Debate was halted. Parliament may also scrap the law that promises women 25% of local council seats. Rights campaigners like Manija Nadari say Afghans are more conservative in the run-up to next year's deadline for NATO troops to withdraw.
People are afraid. They don't know what's going to happen past 2014. They think that the U.S. is trying to negotiate with the Taliban and they're going to bring the Taliban back. So people are acting, even if they're not that conservative, they're acting more conservative. For when the Taliban comes back, they want to be on the good side of the Taliban.
But for now, Sahar Gul continues to do what girls couldn't under the Taliban, go to school. She hopes someday she will get a job to defend the rights of Afghan women. Jennifer Glass, Al Jazeera, Kabul.
Well, let's bring in our guest now. In Kabul, we have Noor Jahan Akbar. She's a women's rights activist. In New Delhi, Sujatha Balachandar, a lawyer and member of the All India Women's Conference. And in Frankfurt, Suad Mekhanat. She's a specialist on women's issues in the Islamic world, also the author of The Children of Jihad, Cases of Radicalization. Good to have you all with us. If we could start with Noor Jahan. Now, in your country, we've had over a decade of Western-supported governance. Where has it left women's rights?
Well, I think it's unfair to say that the reason women have made some accomplishments in the last 11 years is because of the Western intervention here or necessarily because of the current government. But I do feel that women have made great accomplishments in the last 11 years. Now we have more than any other time in history. We have girls going to school, we have women going to the universities, we have women working in media and women working in the government, and the number of female midwives have increased across the country. Women's access to healthcare has increased. Women's access to education, governmental and non-governmental institution has increased. There definitely has been many accomplishments, which is why Afghan women are not now scared that we are going to lose all these accomplishments because of the negotiations that were being made with a terrorist group that has no respect for women's rights.
There are problems, though, aren't there, Noor Jahan? Let me read to you some of the stats I've been digging up. Heather Barr from the Human Rights Watch says female victims of rape and violence wrongfully jailed, they've increased 50% in just 5 months. And she talks about something like 600 women in jail, most of whom she says are victims of things like rape, domestic violence or forced underage marriage. Now, I'm wondering, Sujatha Balachandar, how does a situation like that exist and get worse with apparently so much international attention and funding for the problem or the challenges towards women in Afghanistan?
Well, I mean, like, I would like parallel and compare it with what's happening in India. Yes, of course, there is a lot of great increase in violence against women, but then they have, on the other side, have made a lot of inroads in most of the laws and most of the working, as I would agree with Noor Jahan when she said that women are there in universities. In India, most of the banking institutions are headed by women, and India is one of the very few countries where we had a very powerful women prime minister way back in the 70s, and the present states, many of them are headed by women, few of them are headed by women chief ministers. Yes, there is a problem, and we are kind of addressing to it after the much reported gang rape that happened in the capital city of Delhi in December 2012. We are fast-tracking our laws, and then we are focusing on education. I think that's one thing probably that we were lagging behind that led to most of the problems. So we have a Right to Education Act now in place, which makes it free and compulsory education for any child between the age of 6 to 14. So we hope to make inroads in those activities, plus the funding coming into all the women NGOs that we've been associated with. They're working big time at the grassroots levels. We are seeing changes, but yes, we have a long way to go.
It's interesting you mentioned the point of change at the grassroots level. I want Suad to talk to us a little bit more about, is enough being done on that point of trying to introduce change at the grassroots level in places like Afghanistan?
Well, I think the basic issue or the problem is that when we look at a city such as Kabul, of course, the situation there is different for women, and there has been improvement, and there are for sure many women now also active, and they have jobs, and as Noor Jahan said, they are on TV. But if we go outside Kabul, the situation is totally different, and we should not forget Afghanistan is there's a tribal system, there is a certain tradition. And the problem or the issue is not only the Taliban here. There are even some warlords who are actually allies of NATO who still believe women should not participate in on TV or should not participate in jobs. So the issue is a tribal issue and a cultural issue. And I think to find a way or to find a bridge how to basically explain to the people and especially the men there that giving women certain rights or more rights is even mentioned in the Quran. That has not been done enough, and I think we have to be very careful that the situation in Kabul is different from what is happening outside Kabul.
That's a very interesting point, the point of culture. Noor Jahan, how do you change cultural issues without being accused of interfering in Afghan culture, especially if it's foreign NGOs, foreign money coming in? How do you avoid a situation where you're seen as an outsider, foreigner, trying to squash Afghan values?
Well, I think there are many things within Afghan culture that promote respect towards women. There are many parts of our culture that cherish women as people who are beholders of the family, people who are protectors of the family, who are trainers of the children, who are trainers of the society overall. Women have a long history of being teachers in this culture. The problem is that for the last 40 years of war, we have lost a big part of the good things in our cultures, and that's what we need to revive. We need to remind people of what we used to be before before we had Ikhwan al-Muslimin and Muslim Brotherhood and Mujahideen and Taliban ruin our cultural values with completely Wahhabist views that have no place in the Quran necessarily, no place in the religion, and no place in our culture. I think a good way to do that is through using media, and the Afghan media has been very successful, I think, in putting light on issues of women. They have brought about many cases of women's rights violation to public. They have been able to pressure the government and the judiciary system to bring change, to follow up cases. For example, Sahar Gul's case was highly highlighted in the Afghan media, and that is a change. That means Afghan men and women in the media are taking responsibility towards changing the mentalities of people here. However, I think the problem runs deeper than that, and a government like Afghanistan, a government which is ready to deal women's rights for political gain, women who do dare to go out, women who do dare to talk from the Afghan culture, women who are in the grassroots level are not protected by the judiciary system, by the government. Just last week we lost Islam Bibi, who is a lieutenant officer, who was a lieutenant officer, may she rest in peace, in Helband. She's not the only example of this. We lost Anissa, who was a vaccinator, Malalai Kakar, who was also a police officer. We lost Hanifa Safi, a women's rights activist. We have lost so many women who were working in the grassroots level to bring change in people's mentalities to terrorist groups who killed them, and we know who killed them, but they have no protection from the government, so they cannot continue doing the work they do, and they're scared for their lives, and many of them end up fleeing the country. Just 2 weeks ago, I met a woman, a female head of village in northern Afghanistan, and the first question she asked me was, how can I get out of this country? I asked her why. She said, because nobody is here to protect me. She has already been attacked once, her family has been threatened many times, and she's not the only one. Women who are working here hard every day on the grassroots level face the biggest threats.
All right, when it comes to violence on women, of course, it is a global problem. The World Health Organization recently released its first global review of violence against women, and it found that about 35% of women worldwide have experienced sexual or physical violence, a problem it calls a public health epidemic. Well, as in the case of Sahar Gul, most of this violence is committed by an intimate partner, and it's thought this is a worldwide problem. Women in Southeast Asia, though, are the most likely to have been subjected to violence by a partner. Now, Sujatha, you've had a situation in India where there's been a public outcry over violence against women, and that led to calls for a change in laws, for a change in the way Parliament legislates. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan in May, we've had a setback. I mean, the sort of call that we were hearing there from Noor Jahan for protection of women was supposed to be approved in a law by Parliament, and it didn't happen. Why the very two different experiences, do you think, between Afghanistan and India?
Well, as far as India is concerned, certain problems which Noor Jahan kind of attributes to Afghan specific being, fortunately, we are a little bit more progressive in those in that sense. And there was a big outrage, and it became a turning point in the legislation among the legislating body, and then we were able to bring in those changes. I think 2-3 aspects I would kind of put across to this is, one is the democratic system that we follow, whereby we have a freedom of speech and where we are entitled to say what we have to. And then secondly, mainly I think there was an anti-establishment kind of a war cry that was already in existence in terms of corruption and in terms of now gender violence. Women in a way in India are I think at some level are more empowered. The local governance, if you see, there are a lot of women participation, and like I said, even at the top level we have a lot of women. So they are much more empowered, and I think we forced it upon our legislatures to bring about these change. And I wouldn't restrict
It's interesting, Sujatha, there you said we forced it upon. I mean, is public mobilization, I mean, is that one of the factors that really determines the behavior of then the courts and the police and Parliament?
Absolutely. At least in this case, I can tell you that, because I was coming to that, I wouldn't kind of attribute it only to the women. I think it was kind of all over the world we had this footage, and you would see the number of young men who were participating in these protests. I think the social media played a great role in garnering support, and I think it was not looked at a specific women issue. I think it was looked at the brutality of the issue, and everything was brought to the forefront, and I think that brought about a big change. I think the public forced it upon the legislature, and there was a positive response. I think the establishment came back with such fast-tracking laws, and immediately within less than a month we had certain ordinances happening, and the whole criminal system, we brought in new offences like stalking, voyeurism, were all added to the offences in our criminal books, and many other offences were the scope was extended. Even now, if you do not report has become an offense. I mean, earlier an individual would have been probably by the neighbors and people around would be discouraged from going ahead and reporting such a case. Now, if someone is aware of such a case, they have to report it. And many other friendly things, like a women officer is present when first information report, as we call it, when a complaint is registered. I think we have gone about in a very positive way. The whole establishment, how it looked about this outcry and this outrage, I think in many, well, yes, we do have a lot of criticism. There are certain more, we would expect them to walk
right.
even further, but we are happy from the way they've gone.
So listening to Sujatha there, you get the idea that this is the problem is linked to a whole range of societal factors then, isn't it? Perhaps level of development, democracy, use of social media. There isn't an easy or shortcut answer to this, is there?
No, there isn't. And it's interesting because the word democracy was just mentioned. And we have, as they said, a democracy in Afghanistan, apparently. At least that's what Western countries told their population, that the war was a success because they implemented democracy and brought more rights for women. We have, throughout the Arab world, now many countries that participated in the so-called Arab Spring, and where people said democracy was implemented. But as a matter of fact, what was implemented is a voting system. And I think there is a misunderstanding here between a voting system and democratic rights or universal rights, and women's rights should be universal rights. And what we see is sometimes actually that when we implement democracies in certain areas or depending on what cultural background people there have, you might end up with a leader, or you might end up with a society where people are using this democratic system, the voting system, to implement something that is actually taking away the rights of women.
Right,
and this is why we've seen the uprising in Egypt again.
On that point, Noor Jahan, I mean, when it comes to Afghanistan, you've had politicians there, the president even, talking about women's rights, and yet in May, for example, said he could no longer try and back a law that wants to outlaw and ban violence against women. What's happening there?
Actually, the law was passed by a presidential decree in 2009, and there are violence against women commissionaries in every province of Afghanistan, in most provinces in Afghanistan. So, in that, in regards to the law, the president has supported it.
And
however,
yet it hasn't been supported by Parliament, has it? And you're still complaining of violence, that women aren't protected. So, I mean, how effective would the law be? I mean, it's just a matter of words on a paper, it sounds like.
That's exactly what it is. In Afghanistan, the government chooses which laws to implement and which laws to not. And the majority of laws that are pro-human rights, pro-women's rights, pro-freedom of speech are not implemented in this country. In fact, they are ignored. And even when a law is passed in support of these values, it's only to keep the American donors happy, the foreign donors happy. So there is no real commitment towards women's rights. And this is I think this is best portrayed in when the Ulama Council in Afghanistan created a resolution to ban women from traveling alone. The resolution was not a law, it was only a way to pressure people and to change their mentalities. However, the president backed the resolution and said online that because we are all Muslims, we agree with this, and yes, according to the law, to this resolution, women are secondary to men, and that's fine. So I think our president changes his mind based on who is his audience. If he's talking to the White House, he's very much a women's rights activist, but if he's talking to the Taliban or his angry brothers, as he calls him, or if he's talking to the Ulama Council, he changes his policies quite drastically. So that's why I believe that there is a need for grassroots movements in Afghanistan, one that's not dependent on this government.
Since we don't have someone on this show to tell his side of the story. So let's perhaps, Sujatha, if we get into the question of how effective is it, and is it a good idea at all to link donor money, aid to a country like Afghanistan to progress on particular human rights issues like women's rights? Is that a good idea?
Well, I mean, like the donor money issue does come in. I mean, I hear from Noor Jahan what are all the problems they would be facing. As far as when you link it to her in India as well, we do have donor monies coming in from agencies abroad, as well as the fact that Government of India also has a lot of programs that are funded to the NGOs, which are being taken care of by the NGOs. They do get into those programs. But yes, donor money, they come in with their own agenda to some extent, and on how they would like their money to be. Everybody at the end of the day want their money to be put in a particular activity, so they do come in with their agenda. Yes, of course, but as far as India is concerned, I don't think we women organization face a major issue on that front, because we do have money coming in from the government of India as well as from the foreign donors, and we have seen it working well for the grassroots workers in terms of donor money that's been coming in for various problems. But as far as our country is concerned, I think we are bogged to some extent by our population pressure. When you were asking me about the laws, yes, most of our laws are in place. I think where we find difficulty is in the implementation of these laws, where we are kind of facing problems, and I don't think we are anyway lagging behind in most of the laws, because we have many progressive laws in place. It's only probably because of the population pressures in this country, we probably set back by that.
All right, Suad, can you have any improvement in women's rights without a general improvement in the security situation in the country? I mean, looking at some of the statistics, Amnesty International talking about 74 attacks on schools, destroying or closing down schools, 26 of them on girls' schools. I mean, that's a general security problem as well as a women's rights problem, isn't it?
Yes, it's both, and I think it's also there's a link. There's a linkage, and you said something very important in one of your questions. How can you deal with the issue without giving the people on the ground, now in Afghanistan or any other country in the Islamic world, the feeling that Westerners are basically pushing or trying to implement their values and their point of views in their countries? And I think, and this is also why we see very often attacks against girls' schools in Afghanistan, but also in certain areas in Pakistan where I travel quite often. And I think one of the reasons is, or one of the very important points is to work with people there on the ground, to also not only work with women, but also to include men, to also maybe include scholars, Islamic scholars who can go out and talk to men and explain to them that these rights are actually rights that have been given to women also by by Islam, the religion. And I think this is very important and very linked. And once you find a way to really deal with this issue, how to explain it to people and not to make them feel it's something the West is basically trying to implement, then there might be also more success and security for women who work in this area and also for girls' schools.
All right, I'm interested now. We've got maybe a couple of minutes left on the show, so I'm interested to get the thoughts of Noor Jahan. You know, you indicated that we're heading towards a time of potential instability in Afghanistan as foreign troops are expected to leave, or most foreign troops expected to leave in 2014. A lot of deals being cut. What is your outlook for women's rights in your country? Are you optimistic?
I don't think I have another choice. I think women here, women like me, hundreds of them, thousands of them work every day, and we have to be hopeful. There is no other way. We cannot continue fighting if we don't have hope. I don't think that the country will be extremely unstable or we will fall into another civil war. I have a lot of faith in Afghan youth and Afghan educated population who have come back to this country or who have lived in this country for decades and who love this country and want to invest in it. I know many youth who have been working in this country for decades, and I know that they are committed to making this country a better place. I am one of them, and we are not giving up on a better Afghanistan.
All right, thank you so much. I think we're going to have to end the discussion there. Let's thank all of our guests, Noor Jahan Akbar, Sujatha Balachandar and Suad Mekhennet. And thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. As always, if you want to send us your feedback, email us your thoughts at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching. It's goodbye for now.